Welcome to How You Livin', a transformative podcast featuring best-selling author, inspirational speaker, and minister, Dr. Rick Rigsby. And now, Dr. Rick.
Hello, friends. Thanks so much for joining us. I want to revisit a topic I first introduced during the 2022 Winter Olympics in Beijing, and that topic is focus. Focus is a must for a competitive athlete to be successful, but I would argue that concentrated focus is critical to sustaining any kind of success, regardless of the endeavor. I'm revisiting this topic because our focus appears to be diminishing to dangerous levels. The late martial artist and actor Bruce Lee once said, quote, "The successful warrior is the average man with laser-like focus," end quote. Laser-like focus seems like a foreign concept these days. The attention span of the average adult has dropped to about 8 seconds. Those who study such trends report that it may even be less than 8 seconds for younger ages. Such a deficit in focus affects everything from decision-making to conversations to even the concentration required to drive a car. I was talking with a police sergeant recently. He said every time he goes on tour, that's police jargon for patrol, people behind the wheel, quote, are doing everything except driving, end quote. It's so easy to be distracted in this era of digital overload. We're saturated with content, overwhelmed with sounds and images that compete for our every waking moment. And researchers argue that the rapid dissemination of all these sights and sounds, well, it's reprogramming how the brain receives and processes information. We take in millions of bytes of info daily. We've learned to taste superficially rather than drink deeply. Herbert Simon, cognitive psychology professor, once observed, quote, "A wealth of information creates a poverty of attention," end quote. We've even rationalized that there's really no need to focus. With search engines, we can scroll, we can scan. The world is at our fingertips instantly. Who needs to concentrate? But we pay a price when we don't practice focus. Consider focus as a muscle just for a moment. If that muscle is not used, it invites atrophy. However, if that muscle is used over and over and over, that muscle grows. I mean, just think about it in a very physical sense. Think about it in terms of entropy, the second law of thermodynamics. Entropy reminds us that anything made up of a physical matter is always in the process of decay and eventual chaos unless it's serviced. Here's the bottom line. Whether we're talking physical or mental condition, if we're not growing, we're declining. Our lack of focus has been in sharp focus over these last few decades. Whether struggling to find motivation to complete work or just trying to stay on task without being distracted, the ability to focus has become critical. And though technology in all of its personalized forms have contributed, we still have the power to choose. We choose whether or not we're going to engage. We choose whether we're going to be on our phones and tablets. We choose whether we're going to be present. We have the power of choice. A recent Gallup survey reported that the majority, 67% of the workforce worldwide, is not engaged with their work. Recently, Nicholas Carr published an updated version of his book titled Shallows, What the Internet is Doing to Our Brain. Carr reports that, quote, "The constant and consistent use of our smart devices has programmed the scattering of our attention and caused us to reject the notion of single-minded concentration. Overuse of the internet has dramatically affected our memory, our retention, our concentration, even our relationships. My younger two sons, who are in their 20s, represent a generation of young people who have never known life without being on their phones or staring at their tablets. And it's not much better for adults. A Nielsen survey of media habits among adults reports that we look at some sort of electronic screen over 9 hours every day. Seemingly, friends, we can't get enough. We can't go a moment without checking our cell phones. Social media engagement no longer recognizes boundaries. As a motivational speaker, I see people texting and tweeting as I'm talking. Even as a pastor, I've seen folks on their phones in church. And trust me, not all of them are taking sermon notes. All this, despite the fact that research clearly concludes that excessive use of these devices is having a devastating impact. University of Arkansas researchers concluded that students who did not bring phones to class not only focused more, but scored a full letter grade higher on exams. Here's Nicholas Carr's conclusion, quote, "When we constrict our capacity for reasoning and recall and transfer those skills to a machine or a corporation, we sacrifice the ability to turn information into knowledge." In other words, we get the data, but we lose the meaning. A major challenge as a university professor was attempting to convince my students that breadth and depth of a subject is not acquired by the click of a button. Let's face it, the odds are stacked against us. It's easy to be distracted in this era of digital overload. The constant use of our devices scatters our attention and, in the words of Nicholas Carr, causes us to reject the notion of this single-minded concentration. I'm ready for some good news, aren't you? We can actually coexist with this wonderful technology. We can actually choose a balance between humanity and technology. And there's growing evidence that we can actually rewire our brains and thus renew our focus. This is awesome. You know, we've always known that rest, exercise, and attention to our environment can help limit distractions and increase focus. But emerging research now offers additional hope. For example, Dr. Caroline Leaf, who studies in the area of cognitive neuroscience, argues that the brain has the capacity to constantly reorganize throughout our lifetime. In her book, Switch on Your Brain, Dr. Leaf states that our thoughts, imagination, and choices can change the structure and functions of our brains on every level. Listen to what Leaf said, quote, "You are free to make choices about how you focus your attention, and this affects how the chemicals and proteins and wiring of your brain changes and functions." After reading page after page of scientific documentation about the rewiring of the brain, I just love that Dr. Leaf cites the Holy Scripture, "As a man thinketh, so is he." Isn't that true? Friends, if your mind is wandering right now, if you don't feel mentally there, if being in the zone means waiting behind a school bus as you drive, allow me to offer just a few practical tips that I have found to be very helpful. All my life, I've had attention deficit, and I've learned to use it as an advantage. After being bored out of my mind from kindergarten through undergraduate study, I made an amazing discovery. I could actually concentrate if the incentive was right. As a television reporter, for example, the incentive to get names and facts correct was job security. As a graduate student, the incentive for focus was a reward system that I created. For example, I would study for 45 minutes and then I would reward myself for the final 15 minutes of each hour of study. I did this during the overnight hours for 6 years. My rewards ranged from making microwave popcorn to watching SportsCenter. My choices eventually convinced my brain that I could focus. I reprogrammed my mind to concentrate deeper. I really believe that greater concentration is a learned behavior. Here are just a few focus management tips. Perhaps you're not in school. Perhaps you're not in graduate school, but you just want to remember what you read. Consider this. If our mind thinks faster than our ability to use it, so it stands to reason that if we increase our reading speed, our retention level will increase. Here's a listening tip that I've learned from audience members over the years. They'll doodle during my speeches. That's right. People have come up to me and they've shown me their artwork, their drawings that they made during my speeches and sermons. And they all say the same thing. Doodling helped them to concentrate. And they're absolutely right. Doodling is a focus management technique that helps encourage engagement. You actually listen with greater efficiency as you employ multiple senses. Here's another tip. Make a move. In other words, do something. Basketball coaching legend Pat Riley calls it function forward. Author Dennis Waitley puts it this way. Don't dwell on what you did wrong. Focus on what you do next. Spend your energies on moving forward toward finding the answer. This is why competitive sports can really be an advantage to developing focus. In competition, inevitably, you get beat either on a play or a match or in a game. I remember as a member of the Texas A&M University football staff, we'd encourage players to have temporary amnesia, to forget about the last play. It's gone. It's over. Focus on the next play. Our head coach, R.C. Slocum, was fond of saying, don't look at the scoreboard, just play the next play. Function forward. Here's another tip. Focus your energy on answers, not excuses. Oh, I like this. The great Zig Ziglar said it best. A lack of time is not the issue. We all have 24 hours, but rather it's a lack of direction, a lack of focus. When we focus on problems, we're choosing distraction. Distraction invites excuses. Suddenly, it's everybody else's fault while we're in the situation we're in. Focus on answers, not excuses. Another tip, focus on one thing, a singleness of purpose. Those who have taken to focusing on just one thing, they've taken focus to a whole different level. I'm talking about the Bill Gates of the world, the Kobe Bryants of the world, the Roger Federers of the world. The truly great ones limit their focus and keep it simple. I learned that from listening to Roger Federer, who said he played his absolute best tennis when he focused exclusively on only the tennis ball. Focus, the ability to control our attention. And focus, I believe, is even more important than talent. It determines how we'll perform any task. I love Napoleon Hill's book, Think and Grow Rich. Hill stated in that book that the most successful people in life possess two characteristics. Number one, they're not afraid to fail. And number two, they have a singleness of purpose and a burning desire to accomplish that purpose. I guess in the final analysis, friends, Curly was right. You remember Curly in the movie City Slickers? Billy Crystal plays Mitch, that wannabe cowboy from the city. And Curly was played brilliantly by the great Jack Palance, the rugged, grizzly cowboy veteran. Curly says at one point, do you know, Mitch, what the secret to life is? And then Curly holds up a finger, to which Mitch says, your finger? That's the secret to life? And Curly says, no, it's discovering the one thing that matters. I love reading about people who focus in detail and who focus on the details, from the fighter pilot in the cockpit to the chef in the kitchen. And so I close this episode with one of my favorite stories. It's about a rock band and its effort to make sure that concert crews remained focused. Now, when I say Harvard Business Review and the rock band Van Halen in the same sentence, you might think I'm a bit out of focus. But Van Halen had a very odd rider in his contract that makes a very profound point. The band wanted M&M candies in the green room and in the backstage areas, with all the brown ones removed. If not, the promoter would forfeit the entire show at full price. For years, this was seen as completely odd. The band was making this ridiculous demand of concert organizers just because they could. However, the request was actually a shrewd business move. As lead singer David Lee Roth explained in a 2012 interview, the bowl of M&Ms was an indicator of whether the concert promoter had actually read the band's complicated contract. Listen to what Roth said, quote, Van Halen was the first to take 850 par lamp lights, those are the huge lights, all around the country. At the time, it was the biggest production ever. In many cases, the venues were too outdated or inadequately prepared to set up the band's sophisticated stage. If I came backstage, having been one of the architects of this lighting and staging design, and I saw brown M&Ms on the catering table, then I guarantee the promoter had not read the contract writer, and we would have to do a serious line check of the entire stage setup. End quote. A lack of focus will cost you time. A lack of focus will cost you money. Might even cost you a concert. But making a choice daily to rethink your choices can add immense value to your day, the first day of a more fulfilling life. Friends, that's going to do it for this episode. Until we meet again, this is Dr. Rick, asking the most important question I can ask. How you living?
Are you ready to make an impact in your world right now? Do you want to stop existing and start living your best life right now? Dr. Rick wants to give you the first chapter of his best-selling book, Lessons from a Third Grade Dropout, absolutely free. Just go to www.rickrigsby.com/free gift to get the print or audiobook right now.
This is thepodcastfactory.com.